All right. It's a little after 4:30, and let's get started with the Murray City Municipal Council Committee of the Whole. And let's see, we don't have any approval of minutes. We have 3 discussion items. Let's start with the first one, which is discussion on an ordinance on the text amendments to the MCCD, TOD, MU, and new MU zones. And I have Melinda Greenwood and Jared Hall are presenting.
I apologize, I'm just looking for my flash drive.
Hello, Jared.
Jared, are you presenting? Okay. Well, find that flash drive.
Trey, do you have that? On Trey,
Jared, do you want to go second?
Do you mind? I'm sorry. I'm not able to connect remotely on that.
They got it right. They got it. I love it. It's got it.
Suspense of today's.
Unless Robert can be connected real quick.
Okay, so Trey, you're okay with going early?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
All right, then we'll take discussion item number 2. No. Yeah, it is. Discussion item number 2, which is discussion on the Murray Transportation Master Plan. And we have Trey Stokes presenting.
Where do I plug in, Rob?
Now I have to help you.
Maybe.
I can't get the cord over to my laptop. Wow. Is that where we plug in?
I don't
Sorry. We haven't been here for.
Yeah, we're settling back in.
There's nothing on the floor here.
Okay, so either one.
We
Are
don't
you
have
still
anything
okay to go, Trey or Jared?
I don't have a connection to the.
Ah,
Give me
shoot.
just a minute. Rob's gonna grab a cable.
Okay.
I'd just like to point out it's officially at this moment no longer our fault. There you go. Beginning the meeting with the assignment. I love it. I'm in spot number 1.
Jared, you're the only one that could get away with that. You know that?
You gotta cultivate that for years.
You guys better hurry or I'm going to start telling jokes.
Oh, no. You don't want that. Or maybe you do.
I have an adapter, but I don't have the HDMI cable. It's in the room next door, I think, from last week. have a HDMI cable. I've got the adapter, I just don't have HDMI cable.
This is just hitting me. I've never seen this.
Where's that?
Where's the big one? That's
Is it in the room next door?
Let's see, how many IT guys does it take? I'm just kidding you. Look at Rob. Look at Rob. He's-
does that one work if you put your thing there? I mean, I know it's not ideal, but I was just curious if you plug that in.
Also, something I failed to say is that all council members are present.
Rob.
We were, yeah, that's probably what happened. Thanks. Just a second. Okay. Well, thanks. I was here 2 weeks ago, but not at this stand. Not at this stand, not in this room. Okay, I think we're in business. So,
Okay,
thanks.
so we'll take number 2 discussion item first, and that is discussion on the Murray Transportation Master Plan. Trey Stokes, take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to talk about our transportation plan that we've been working on over the last year. We think that we put together a pretty good, pretty comprehensive plan that really addresses our needs, our transportation needs here in the city for the next 10 to 15 years and maybe even a little bit longer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the past plans that we've done and some of our accomplishments on those past plans, and then talk about kind of the process and procedure that we've followed to get to where we are this evening. I've also got Thomas McMurdy here from Avenue. He's project manager with Avenue that has really helped us through this process and done a lot of modeling and a lot of interesting things to get us to this point. So when I'm done, he's going to take over and really talk about the ins and outs, nuts and bolts of the plan, the modeling, and then ultimately some of the results and recommendations in the study.
Great, welcome.
So we really like to keep our transportation master plan as updated as we can. We're similar to utilities that we like to keep a handle on things and do updates about every 10 years. Typically, the transportation master plan update would follow a general plan or major zoning changes or major growth and development, and that's just so that we can kind of keep up with things. In the recent history of Murray, we've done 3 transportation plans. We did one in 1993, just a couple of years before I started here with the city. We did another one in 2006, and then the current one in 2021. Which is still in draft form, but I think we're really close on it. So in 1993, the transportation plan was done concurrent with the general plan. It was a fairly basic plan and really just had one objective, and that was to identify impacts of future development and growth. Out of this plan, there were 12 priority projects that were identified, and really the main one was the need for a north-south collector between State Street and I-15. They called it back in '93 a Main Street extension. Also called it a north-south corridor. It's now called Cottonwood Street, is what we'll refer to moving forward. Accomplishments from this plan, widening of Winchester Street from State Street to 900 East. That was done in 1995, 96. A great project and really fostered a lot of development and improvements along Winchester Street. First phase of Cottonwood Street was constructed just west of the hospital, as well as starting the second phase, which was the bridge over 5300 and light rail. Widening of 4500 South, east of State, widening of 5300 South, west of I-15, improvements on 5600, some widening on 9th East, as well as an emphasis on alternate modes of transportation, the UTA light rail project. And we worked really close in the late 90s with UTA to locate track stations and really nail down where we wanted these hubs to be, and crossings, safety improvements, things like that. 2006 Transportation Master Plan was a little more comprehensive. It was a little more thorough plan. It was kind of followed the 2003 General Plan update and East Side annexation. So the focus of this was really to look at all of the growth that had occurred with those East Side annexations. Objectives were to provide a safe and efficient movement of traffic, encourage use of alternate modes of transportation, support neighborhood traffic calming, increase mass transit operations, promote capacity improvements, and again, identified the north-south collector between I-15 and State as a major priority, which is Cottonwood Street. And then the other thing I'll throw in there was it really identified the need for us to take care of our infrastructure, to really focus on making those surface improvements, overlays, rebuilds, and really what prompted this was the east annexations. There was a lot of old roads or roads that were left in kind of disrepair when we annexed that area. So it's been a real focus of the city to reconstruct up in that area. And we've made a lot of progress, and we're still working on that to this day. So just some of the major accomplishments. I'll kind of go through these real quick, but we did some intersection improvements at State 5300 South. That was adding dual left turns. The same thing with State 4500 South. We worked on a major widening project from I-15 to State Street on 4500 South. Continued to make improvements on Cottonwood Street on the south end of the city with near Winchester in conjunction with a light rail project. Continued with improvements along 3rd West and 5900 South, and then just recently upgraded Vine Street with bike lane, sidewalk, and some minor widening. So really the big purpose for the 2021 Transportation Master Plan was to account for changes that happened in the 2017 General Plan, and really look at the impacts of the lots of major zone changes. So between 2006 and current time, we've had a lot of commercial areas and industrial areas and manufacturing areas convert or change zones to mixed use, which all of you know is kind of a mix of commercial, but a lot of residential and some pretty high densities when we're talking residential. So we really needed to get a handle on the impacts of these, and that was one of the major reasons for this study. Also wanted to set transportation priorities and then identify projects that we can maybe get federal dollars or state dollars. And then it also helps us on a yearly basis to put together improvement plans and budgets. So real quick, and there's quite a bit on this slide, but I'll get through it here pretty fast. But the process that we've followed to kind of get to where we are tonight, it involved funding. So the funding for this master plan was appropriated in 2020 by the City Council. We soon after that, we put together a committee, a technical advisory committee, to work on this project and work with our consultant. That committee included Doug Hill from the Mayor's Office, Danny Astle from Public Works, myself from Engineering, Chris Zawislak from Engineering, Jared Hall from Planning, and Kip Davies from Police. So once we had the committee together, we put together a project scope, identified goals and objectives, solicited for a consultant, went through that process, ultimately selected Avenue to do the to work with us to do this master plan, and brought them on last April to kind of kick the project off. And one of their first big objectives and tasks was to initiate some public outreach and some public involvement. And this was sort of occurring right when COVID was hitting hard, and we were having a lot of restrictions, and it really kind of tied our hands on how we would go out for public input and public involvement. But we ultimately put together a project website and got some pretty good feedback that way. We created some interactive maps and some interactive surveys, and sent out flyers, and really did a lot of outreach to get people to come to this website. And we did fairly well. We had, I think, better input and more responses than we would from a normal public meeting that we're meeting face to face. So we actually thought it was a good, effective process. Next step in this was really data collection and traffic modeling. And this took a little bit longer than we had anticipated, primarily because we were trying to capture all the development that was coming into the city and a lot of these mixed use areas. And every time we thought we had things sort of figured out and we had these areas identified, we would get another request or more interest in developing in other areas of the city. So it was kind of an iterative process, but we ultimately think that based on input from planning, working with Jared really close, we think we captured those areas where we expect to see the growth. We updated the model, and we feel really, really good when we finally got to that point that we think we've nailed down these areas. But with the modeling, we were able to identify those locations, those areas where we have issues, and come up with projects to mitigate those issues. And ultimately, Thomas is going to kind of talk about some of those. So to finish up, here we've this spring we worked on a draft of the plan, and then went back to that interactive website to get feedback from the public on the plan. Again, we had some maps, some interactive surveys, some nice things to get that feedback from residents. Got them to look at projects and provide feedback on the projects. I think it was fairly effective, and I think we've got good feedback. So that kind of brings us to where we are now. I'll mention one more thing. We did present this to the Planning Commission on May 20th, and had a good discussion with the Planning Commission, and ultimately they voted for a positive recommendation to the City Council. So we hope that there aren't any big issues or big concerns, and that we will be back in a few weeks to ask you to consider adopting a resolution approving this plan. So any questions on that information?
Trey, did the Planning Commission have any changes?
They did not have any changes.
Okay, so they accepted.
They had some good questions, some good comments. We had a good discussion, and they held a public hearing. I don't know that there was any public comment in that hearing.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
So, yeah,
There were.
and so they made a motion. I think it was approved it
Okay,
7-0 and making that recommendation. So,
okay.
so
All right. Any questions for Trey?
okay. Well, I'm going to turn the time
Did a
over
great
to
job.
Thomas. And he's a great presenter. He'll keep you interested in this as we kind of work through it. So
Trey, one more thing. How much did this cost?
the study,
Uh-huh.
110,000.
110. Okay.
Had I think the original was 105, and then we ended up with a little bit extra with some of the interactive web pages and some of the things we had to do for public involvement, public outreach. So
Okay.
so really close to that
Okay.
105, 110.
Great. Thank you. Yes?
So, when I was in grad school at the University of Utah several years ago, I took an ethics class. And on the very first day, the very first class, the professor posed a question to everybody, and he said, "What would you do in the following situation?" And the situation was that you approach a rural traffic light, and the light is red, and you want to go through it. And he said, "What would you do?" And there was a gal in the class, and she raised her hand, and she suggested that. She said, "I think the traffic lights are there for our safety. And if there's no cars around and there's no cops around, I'd probably I might slow down, but I'd probably just breeze right on through because there's no, it's not going to impact, my safety or anything." And then there was a gentleman there, and he raised his hand, and he suggested that, ethically,
Can you speak into the mic? Then we'll get all your words.
Sure. He suggested that, he really wanted to obey the traffic laws. And so he said, what I would do is I'd come up to the light and I'd stop. But then I'd make a right on red, which is totally legal. And then I'd immediately do a U-turn on the side street and make another right. And that way I'd be like going through and kind of be on my way. And so, I eventually raised my hand and I said, I know traffic signals that are like this. And the signal cycle length can't be more than 40 or 50 seconds max, which means my green time is going to be coming up in 15 or 20 seconds. And I suggested that I would just wait. I just wait. Anyway, I tell you that story because very rarely does being a traffic engineer come in handy in real life, but I believe that it did that time. And so Trey and Chris and your traffic engineers, every once in a while, I feel like it's that having that information can come in handy. This HDMI is a little bit fickle.
I really thought maybe you saw me on where the Chick-fil-A driving says I waited there about 5 minutes the other day and I wanted to sneak across. So
well, we could talk about signal cycle lengths if you'd like, but I suspect that you waited more than one cycle. Before I kind of get into a PowerPoint presentation, I just want to plug and talk about our website a little bit. MurrayTransportationPlan.com. If you go to that site, it is still up. It is still live. It looks like this. We did a lot of really good work with Trey and your whole staff. I wonder if my laptop's just not connected too well. To build the site and maintain it, it's just that TV is kind of coming in and out. It is designed, the whole website is designed to just kind of scroll and one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to provide folks that go to the site basically the entirety of the plan in just kind of a snapshot. And so we built in every chapter into just something that's like a single graphic and just a simple text that's easy to kind of understand. And you can look and see existing conditions, and you can keep scrolling down and see future conditions and the land use that we're planning for and where the growth is. And you can see the traffic that we're projecting and get the final project list. And all of these things are clickable, and you can see them, larger. And so the whole thing is really designed to just be consumable for, your residents and anybody who wants to go and really kind of understand the plan. We also have this blue button right here at the top that just says click here and download the plan. You get a full PDF of not just the entire transportation plan document, but it includes the entire appendix as well. And Trey talked about that. We launched this kind of right after the pandemic. And so a lot of the public interaction that we had to be online. We couldn't get together in person. And so We launched a public survey last summer in July, and we ended up with over 370 survey responses. And you can go through and like see how your constituents voted and what people were saying to survey questions in the appendix. It's up on the screen now. You can kind of just see some of that information. And then earlier this year, we asked the mayor to help us put together a video. And I don't know if you guys have watched this, but it's about the greatest video that's ever been done, of inviting residents to help us and participate and take the online survey, which was just a lot of fun. It worked out great. And then this online survey that he's talking about is embedded into the website. And we got another over 200 responses from folks that filled out the survey and gave us a lot of information on the draft project list and what they'd like to see and any type of changes. And we incorporated a lot of those ideas directly into the final plan that's there. So anyway, it was great fun to shoot him. Shoot a video of him up in the mayor's office. Jennifer was really helpful with that. And so, again, just kind of a plug for the website. And it's going to stay live. So anybody who is hearing about this tonight or in the future weeks, you can go and visit it. You can always go and kind of download the plan to get that information. It'll always be on the website for months and likely years to come. So I did want to spend a little bit of time today kind of going through some of the details that are included in the plan and then really kind of focus on the project list. Initially, I wanted to just say that working in Murray has been a delight. I mean, your staff has been amazing and really good to work with. The whole team has been, they participated really good, shared a lot of information. It's not always like that, by the way, working with cities, but Murray city staff has just been great. A lot of the existing condition analysis that we have in Chapter 2 has also been really pretty good. We wanted to break down by modes. Looking at bicycling and walking was really key. It was evident in the survey. It was also really, just evident in the projects that we're looking at. So what's on the screen right now is the existing active transportation connections in Murray. Murray served so well with the Jordan River Trail on the west side, and you guys have really been expanding the bike routes in your city. And there aren't many cities that actually have this many good bike facilities kind of around, and it shows. So Murray's got really good existing active transportation connections. You also served really well with transit. Having the track stations as well as the commuter rail station makes Murray unique in the valley. There's again few cities that have a commuter rail station, and you guys also have bus routes on State Street and 9th East on Winchester, and so they do a pretty good job of serving transit throughout the whole community. We provided in the plan some transit numbers that show that the number of riders of UTA service here in Murray is significant. It's actually a lot higher than a lot of your neighboring cities. And again, it's because you guys have those stations. Still, I'm sure there's more we can do to kind of, plan for additional connections. The bulk of the transportation plan really revolves around our streets, our roads. And what's on the screen now is the existing functional classification system. And this is a hierarchy of roads, right? It goes from interstate down to local streets and kind of shows, where we plan for like more capacity and maybe less access versus down to the streets like collectors that provide more access locally. Ideally, with like arterials, you want to have those planned about every mile and a half, and you want collectors kind of spaced in between them. And again, looking at this map, Murray really is served pretty well from that standpoint. You guys are bisected by two freeways, but you also have two freeways that can, serve your residents in the community. And then your arterial spacing really is pretty good. There aren't a lot of, problems or areas where we have gaps or we're missing some connections. The roadways themselves are carrying cars, and the map that's up there now shows our existing traffic volumes. I say existing, but they're pre-pandemic. Most of these volumes are from 2019. And so, and there's a couple that might even be from 17 or 18. We pulled most of this data from the Traffic on Utah Highways, the latest numbers from UDOT, and it's supplemented by a lot of TISs. Trey and Chris shared with us all the recent traffic counts that had been done around Murray from other traffic impact studies, and we were able to incorporate a lot of those traffic volumes. And so while it looks like there are corridors that have, a lot of cars, traffic volumes really by themselves don't tell the story. You really need to be able to see how they compare to congestion versus how much capacity is on the roadway. And that's what level of service does. And so that's on your screen right now. Level of service is a fun measure. It's an A through F. You get a letter grade on how well your street is doing, and it's measured by the amount of delay, not the amount of cars you're carrying. And so green streets that are like level of service A and B are doing great. They're way under capacity. C streets, ones that are yellow on the map, are still under the capacity for their daily traffic. However, they are really kind of optimal, right? They're serving a lot of cars, but they don't have a lot of excess capacity. And then our D streets, which are orange on this map, are ones that are the volumes on those corridors are really getting close to the amount they can carry, right? So those are the ones that are starting to get to concerning levels. UDOT has a standard of planning for and building up to level service D, but not building necessarily more than that. And so level service D is still pretty good. It is considered acceptable by UDOT standards. And then E and F are the problem areas. Those are the ones that are red on this map. And again, those are areas that in the peak hour between 5 and 6, they really are carrying more cars than they should. They're kind of over capacity, if you will, and just experiencing a lot of delay. Again, the good news here in Murray is, there's only a handful of streets that aren't doing pretty well. And most of our streets are doing a great job of serving the traffic today in 2020, or in this case in 2019. So overall, we're doing pretty good. We can enjoy a pretty good quality of life. We're not experiencing so much delay. There certainly is some delay on 45th. You can see that that's orange. There's sections of 54 that you can see are red and orange. And then, 59th is what kind of stands out as being like this big kind of red line. It's really just a little bit over capacity. I think the capacity we assumed for that street is in the neighborhood of 10, 11,000, and it's carrying about 12. So it's just a little bit too much. It's not like crazy concerning. Like we don't need to go out there like we have like immediate problems, but it is the way that it maps. It's just over capacity. But besides all the existing conditions that we want to understand and take a look at and work with your residents to know about their problems, a lot of what the plan really does is plan for that future growth. And Trey alluded to this quite a bit, that most of what our analysis really was about was how can we handle the growth that's coming or the changes that are going to happen here in Murray. And so what you see on your screen right now is just the growth charts that we looked at. This data came directly from the 2017 general plan in terms of projections and land uses that might change. Overall, there's not that much growth, right? Ultimately, Murray is pretty built out. You guys don't have the growth that like Harriman or Saratoga Springs has, where they're like tripling the population. But there is certainly some growth that's coming as we look at infill or redevelopment, or specifically like mixed use developments and those type of things. So you can see populations projected to add about 10,000 from 49,000 to 59,000, and in about 6,000 households. But one thing that is unique is that your employment is higher than your population. In fact, I think there's only 2 cities in the entire state that are like that, just Salt Lake and Murray. Every other city is basically a bedroom community where they have more residents than they have jobs, right? And what makes Murray unique in that way is that in the PM peak, or just as people are transitioning from work back to home, usually it's just getting them from their jobs to their homes. But here in Murray, you also have to accommodate all the, the jobs that you have and the people that are traveling home. So it makes for a more consistent split of traffic, but it also means that, you guys tend to be a little bit more congested during the day as you just have so much employment in your city. So where is some of this growth happening? We've got a couple of maps. These are, again, on the website and the plan. They kind of show where within the city is this growth happening. This is household growth that's shown here in the blue and purple. You can see it's concentrated around a couple of kind of mixed use residential zones or nodes, and a little bit of kind of infill. You can kind of see a lot of it's concentrated in the north section, kind of over by I-15 or kind of in that west side. There's also some redevelopment that I assume is likely in the downtown area where you guys are putting in, the new one-way streets and things. And so that's kind of where we're anticipating the residential growth. And then similarly, the employment growth is kind of in that same area. This includes areas like the Security National Building and the Galleria Apartments and some of the other, areas that might be kind of like in and around I-15. And so, as well as you can see, there's a node just north or on the north side of Fashion Place Mall that we assume that there's going to be some additional job growth as well. So that's where kind of the people are growing, and that's where the jobs are growing. And then if we add those folks into the travel demand model and measure it in the future, this is what we see on the streets. So this is a 2050 no build level of service map. So we've added 30 years of growth projections, but we haven't made any improvements to the road system. And you can see that Murray City is a lot more red and a lot more orange, that so many of our streets, are getting worse. And one of the problems there is that, if we go back to the existing map, a lot of our streets are in that level service C or D area, which means they're serving well today, but it only takes a little bit more to kind of push them over capacity, right? So that they're starting to be problematic. And then you see that play out when you add growth, but then no improvements. And so the 2050 map is looking pretty red. So that's concerning. And so the bulk of the work that we did with residents and with Trey and just kind of like doing things throughout was to develop a plan and a project list that's kind of going to help transition us out of how red that map is and maintain the same quality of life and level of service that we enjoy today. And so I really just want to spend maybe the rest of the presentation talking about these transportation projects that you see on the map. We've got 61 total. It sounds like a lot, but I'll show you, that we really went in depth. We really wanted to get down to some of the nitty gritty stuff. We have a bunch of intersection ones that are just like signal improvements. We've got a lot of these projects that are on UDOT roads, State Streets, and others. And this also includes like sidewalks and bike lanes and some projects that aren't going to be, that costly. We have split them into 3 phases. You can see the phases 1, 2, and 3 are in these kind of 10-year increments. They match with Wasatch Front's LRTP, the Regional Transportation Plan. So we've matched their phases so that we, are aligning with their funding and their phasing breakdown. So first, maybe let's look at improvements by type, and then we'll look at the improvements by phase. And so on the slide now, on the left side of your screen is a map of the corridors where we add bike lanes. And several projects do multiple things, right? When we want to redo the street and maybe resurface it, maybe widen it a little bit or stripe, in bike lanes. And so if you look at, again, these blue lines, all of those are added bike lanes. And when you compare that or add that to the existing active transportation system and the bike lanes you already have on Vine Street and others, it really makes kind of a more complete network throughout the whole city for folks that maybe want to get out of their cars and cycle around. On the right side is a map of added sidewalks or improved sidewalks. And we've got several areas through the city that, need some sidewalk improvements as well. Several of these corridors, some of the segments are relatively small. You can see like number 54, 51, 47, 52, 11. Some of these are kind of smaller segments where, the sidewalk is just needs to kind of be addressed. But it's something that we didn't want to overlook in the plan. So we've included sidewalk projects as well. And then we work closely with Chris and Trey and the engineering department to look at intersections and specifically which intersections are going to be, bottlenecks or choke points in the future. How can we address some of that in the plan? And you can see we've got about 20 or so intersection projects. A lot of these are on state routes. You can see several of them on State Street. UDOT knows about these intersections. They've already been planning for them. In fact, in Wasatch Front's Long Range Transportation Plan, they have operations. They call it State Street's operations improvements, but it's basically intersection improvements all along State Street. So the good news is that's on their radar. They understand, that several of these intersections need to be, upgraded or taken a look at in terms of like the signal timing or some of the turn pockets and a little bit of some safety improvements and crosswalks. So, and then finally, but I will say we've also got a handful of these that are new signals. So those are in yellow. And so we've taken a look at several areas that could improve from new signals. A lot of those were ones that were specifically mentioned by your residents in some of the public comments that we got. One that comes to mind is, I want to say Atwood and maybe 45th or 48th. That area has like a flashing beacon today and has maybe some safety issues. And so we wanted to plan for, a new signal there. And then you can see there's a couple others. There's one on like College Drive and Murray Boulevard. And so there's a couple of those signals are also, associated with maybe growth in the area. So they are all in the plan as well. Oh, and then lastly, on that side, the map of red projects are all widening and restriping. These are ones that are like true capital improvements where we really need to like take a good hard look at the road and think about, what the capacity needs to be. Do we need to widen it? Are we, moving some curb? And those projects are in here. I'll talk more about maybe the specifics of some of those more impactful ones here in a slide or two. But if we build those projects, then we will get to this future functional classification map, which doesn't look too different from the existing. but there's 1 or 2 roads that have been upgraded. And then we will get to this future level service map, which looks so much better than that no-build map that I showed you before, right? And so much of the red and the orange that were in that previous map, we've kind of, been able to address with all of these road projects and eliminate it. In fact, if I exit this presentation, one of the things that is that's on the website, shoot, I lost it. Can I go forward? Transportation plan. One of the things that we included in the website is, if you jump down to the bottom of the improvements on the projects, there is a level of service map, this one right here. And there's a little slider here that shows you future no build on the left and future build on the right. And you can see how much, that red moves and changes and really kind of, we can address. And so, yeah, if you haven't played around with the slider, it's there. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, and you can kind of, see how they transition. So if we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at some of these projects, this map and list, these are the phase 1 projects. It includes a project cost. One of the things that Trey mentioned was a detailed cost estimate we went through and came up with, the best cost estimates we could for each of these projects. But we also looked at funding sources and specifically what other funding mechanisms might be out there. And so you'll see 2 columns for cost, one that's total and one that's Murray City responsible. And so projects that are on UDOT roads obviously can be funded by UDOT. And there's several other projects within Murray City that even it shows you guys totally responsible for. However, Wasatch Front has funding mechanisms through federal aid dollars, and there are others as well where you can, seek funding for even just city exclusive projects. So, those numbers at the bottom, the 41 million and the 22 million for Murray projects over the next 10 years might sound scary. I don't want them to be. I can tell you that I did Saratoga Springs Transportation Master Plan, and they have over $1 billion of projects, and the part that city is responsible for is well over $250 million. So ultimately, you guys are like, a tenth of what their needs are, which is good. But also that even this 22 million, so much of that, there might be opportunities to work with some state and federal funding to move these projects along. In fact, the state has added, TTIF funds 2 years ago for transit-related projects, including active transportation projects, and they have the active TIF, which is brand new from the legislature as well. So anyway, there's funding sources available. On phase 1, maybe just a couple things to point out. Project number 1 are really those new one-way streets in downtown Murray. Those I know are already underway and are probably, I don't know what their current status is, but I know that those are moving along. I guess I'd really like to maybe talk about project number 3, which is Murray Boulevard. This is a project we've probably spent the most time on with, Jared and Chris and Trey and everybody kind of working on this project because it is growth in that area, not just from the Galleria apartments, but also, things on College Drive or Security National, just growth in general. It's really forcing the need for that road to be widened to a 5-lane section between 54 and 45th. So between our 2 freeway interchanges, we really do need kind of a 5-lane road through there. And that is, would be impactful and has some costs, but it's a little, it's due to a lot of the growth. And we worked really closely with the city to try and understand the timing and how much and where that would be. And so, but that's really a project that we feel is needed. And if we can get that in, it'll really lessen the impacts to the transportation network of just growth in the area and, expansion both through residential and commercial developments. Along with that, you can see project 10 is 4800 South, that project likely needs some improvements. And then there are 3 signals in that area at 7, 9, and 16 that all of those signals will likely need to be improved as well. Part of that is just, having some left turn pockets to be able to accommodate, the new lane configurations on that corridor. So really that might be kind of like, the biggest project in this early phase and just trying to understand that growth. Our later phases, this is phase 2, and I'll show you phase 3 on the next slide. Really, the projects here are probably less urgent from like a critical transportation need. And a lot of the projects that are in this phase, you can see, include things like added sidewalks and accommodating new signals and adding some bike lanes. There's a handful of projects that are like widening from 2 to 3 lanes, which is really, there might be a way that we can do some restriping, but, in some cases, we might need to move a little curb. But again, these projects are probably 10 years out or more, maybe, a little bit less critical, but can still be really important to your residents and as well as the overall system kind of coming together. And that's also true for phase 3. These are the green projects that are on your screen are, that 20 to 30 year time frame from 2040 to 2050. Again, less critical. And a lot of these might be some of those sidewalk improvements. I will tell you that if you have the funding, if there's a need, if you want to address Project 50 before Project 5, I would very much encourage you to do that. I did West Jordan's Transportation Master Plan a couple years ago, and Bill Baranowski is their traffic engineer, and he called me up about a project that was like the last one, the very, very last one was like Project 86, and they did it like the second project that they did because they had the opportunity to just kind of like restripe it as they were resurfacing or whatever, and they addressed it quickly. So, all of these might be needs, and just, I know that your staff kind of balances kind of those things, but, they aren't needed, immediately, but, if we can make these improvements, it'll improve transportation in the city. Again,
Can you kind of speed it up a little bit? We're running late. I'm sorry to have to cut you off.
This was our comparison, and here's my final slide. Well, penultimate slide. I got one more after this because I think it's kind of cool. So these are the general conclusions. A lot of your anticipated growth, you guys kind of know about it. It's kind of near I-15. We talked about several of these things. Vehicle traffic and congestion are growing faster than population, and part of that is because so many of your roads are already near capacity, so it doesn't take too much to kind of be the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will. And so when we add just a little bit more traffic, it can really exacerbate problems. Active transportation and roadway projects really, a lot of these projects really benefit Murray as a whole. And then, we really are, if you go back to this, we really are doing enough planning work, I think, to maintain the same quality of life you guys enjoy. If you look at the map on the right, which is our build map against existing, it really is pretty similar. Lastly, if I may just take 30 more seconds, one of the questions that we asked residents in the first survey was, we asked them to rank their top 5 roadway elements. And we gave them this drawing of a made up street that's kind of got all these different roadway elements. And we surveyed them basically because we wanted to know, like, would they prefer bike lanes versus on-street parking? Is a wider sidewalk better than park strips or those type of things? So we asked them to rank it. It's a ranking, so 1 is best, right? So you're looking for the highest score. In this case, the number 1 rated element of a street is sidewalk. And number 2 is a travel lane, right? Where you actually put the car. So think about that. Sidewalks, more important, more critical than even like where the cars go. But both of those are probably pretty critical. And then number 3 you see is bike lanes at 2.5. So, and then number 4 is a multi-use path or like a trail next to the street. And then, 5 is like a tie between like a two-way center turn lane and a buffer. And you can see parking and park strips are real distance at the end there. And so that was something that we really wanted to know from your residents. Again, over 350 people filled the survey. In fact, flyers went out in your utility bill. So you guys probably saw them last July. And we got some pretty important and kind of fun information to look at. Thank you. I'd be happy to entertain any questions, or Trey could take questions as well.
Yeah, we've got to continue on. We have kind of a busy committee of the whole, but thank you so much. Does anyone have a quick question that they...
No, I just want to tie, but this is the first time you've ever had anybody tell you to speed up your presentation.
I tend to speak pretty quickly, yeah, but Diane's really on it. I loved it.
I know, I'm sorry.
Just a quick
Thank
comment.
you so much.
Just a reminder that the council will be taking action on this. So this was your information. If you had questions or comments or whatever, please share those with Trey. And but at the next meeting, you will be voting to approve this transportation plan as an official document of the city.
Great. Okay, thank you, Doug. Okay, we'll continue on, and we're back to the first discussion item, which is discussion on an ordinance on the text amendments to the MCCD, TOD, MU, and new MU zones. Jared Hall, and I see Melinda is here, so.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks for having us here tonight. So we're still not getting there. There we go. Okay.
right.
Thanks for having us here tonight. And just to start out, I'll try not to move this at all. That'll be the goal. As soon as it comes back. We are here tonight to talk to you in the committee of the whole about the land use amendments for mixed use zoning that we gave a brief presentation to you about the big ticket items with that a little bit ago. We have been to the Planning Commission, and they have forwarded a recommendation to you, which we'll get to in the presentation. Not sure. But at any rate, the Planning Commission did vote to recommend for you, and there are these many different zones involved. The 3 existing zones that the city has: the mixed-use zone, the MCCD, the Murray City Center District zone, and the TOD zone, the Transit-Oriented Development Zone, as well as those 2 new zones that we're proposing. What? But it won't. It's the connection, not. At any rate, let me start going through some of those changes. The changes that we've proposed kind of fall into larger categories. Parking was one of the concerns that was brought up. Density of that residential use that's a component of mixed use was a concern. And again, buffering and some other design considerations. They all came up as a result of looking at not just mixed use zoning, but expanding mixed use zoning into other parts of the city where it had previously not been considered. The existing 3 zones are centered around our transit stations that Trey and Thomas were just talking about. Our 3 large transit stations are well suited for mixed use. The rest of the city, we need to look at exactly how that mixed use is put together to make sure that it makes sense. So that's the reason in terms of background why we're here tonight. The temporary, this guy said transportation like 16 million times, so that's going to be a problem all night. The temporary land use restriction that was put in place in February is expiring soon. And that was put in place so that we could look at this for you as a council and try to make recommendations to make this work in terms of land use. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can. We did send out to you the drafts of the changes. And again, the slides as well that we showed to the Planning Commission. We have some new slides for you tonight. Eventually, you're going to see them. Maybe not in the work session, but maybe eventually later on. For that one again? Sure. I'll try anything at this point. I'm good. Maybe it's just that I'm cursed. I could believe that. I'm going to try this. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get there. So I'm gonna go through some of these slides without you being able to see them. So I apologize, but I want to hit the main points and talk about them at least. Maybe if I hold that way. No, still nothing. Okay. That TLUR, as we said, is about to expire, and those existing mixed-use zones are centered around our transit stations. So the changes that we're proposing for those that you'll see in your red lines and your clean copies are, there we go. That's on. So don't touch anything. If you could just stay right there on the floor, that'll be great. Your head's acting as an antenna or something. As we said, those existing mixed-use zones, as you can see on the screen in orange there in various shades, are centered around our track stations basically. As we looked at moving into the rest of the city, or allowing mixed-use zones to be, or mixed uses to go to the rest of the city, we wanted to make sure that those densities and other considerations were taken into account for that different environment. And again, mixed use is kind of the way that we are trying to do revitalizing commercial areas, keeping them alive as the economy changes, as people do commerce differently. These are the kinds of things we need to do to facilitate new development. But as we considered where we would go in the city with new zones or with expanded mixed-use zones, we wanted to look to the general plan to tell us where we should do that. And this is a seemingly complicated map. It's really not as complicated as it seems at first, but those nodes that you can see illustrated there come from our general plan. There are 2 or 3 different maps in the general plan that illustrate these. This is the one that illustrates them the most concisely. So you have TOD nodes where we already have mixed-use zoning, generally speaking. BRT station nodes that you can see here in the middle of the Valley running through along State Street, where we're going to have a State Street bus rapid transit line soon. Those areas might be appropriate for considering mixed-use zoning, et cetera. And then again, city nodes, city retail centers that have been identified, and regional centers that have been identified. This is the Fashion Place Mall, clearly. So these are areas where we might consider an appropriate implementation of a new mixed-use zone. And that would be kind of the first guidepost that we'd use in talking about it, whether it was appropriate or not. Again, these are areas that are not already mixed use. Some of them are around the station areas, here. But not all of them are. So when we're talking about implementing a new zone there, that's what we mean. If you're already zoned mixed use, you're already mixed use. This came up in the Planning Commission discussion. If you're already zoned mixed use, you don't need to reapply to be mixed use. You stay in the zone that you're in. It might get renamed. Things might change in the zone, but you're still zoned mixed use. If you're in an area that's not currently mixed use, and it's one of the areas we identify, then we want to consider different things and consider whether we should be allowing that mixed use zone to go into that area. Building on that, we have proposed in the ordinances in that now we're talking about the two new zones. So let me pause for a moment and kind of categorize those. We have two new proposed zones, the center's mixed use zone and the village mixed use zone. And you can think of them as medium and light. So center's mixed use would be kind of a medium mixed use zone, and village would be light. And they'd be appropriate in different areas of the city. First consideration would be this mapping to see if they're in one of these areas or near one of these areas or along one of our transportation corridors. And the next considerations we wanted to propose as a staff for the implementation of those zones would be these goals. So we ought to be able to, as a staff, advise people that are asking about mixed use zoning, whether it would be appropriate, and then forward to the Planning Commission and to you as the council, that these kind of goals listed on the right here would be met by rezoning to mixed use or one of those two mixed use zones instead of leaving it zoned the way it was. So if it wouldn't result in high quality redevelopment of commercial property or help retain and rehabilitate commercial uses that were already there, or increase the local access to commercial services for the project residents and for people in the surrounding neighborhoods. If it can't do these kinds of things, then it's maybe not as appropriate for mixed use as it seems, even based on that map. So it's a second kind of consideration to make. Centers mixed use, again, is the first of the two that we're proposing. The parking, and we'll get to the parking in the existing mixed use zones in just a second, but the parking that we're considering, or that we're proposing, is instead of being a per unit parking amount, like 1 space per unit or 1.25 spaces per unit, it's based on units, yes, but then on those units' bedrooms. So a studio gets one level of parking versus a single bedroom versus a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, and on and on. So the mix of bedroom counts in the project determines the overall parking for the residential. And then the commercial spaces are parked according to their square footage as well. As an example, for example, sorry, that's not the parking table, but you have those parking tables in your drafts, and we can talk about parking if we need to in just a moment. Residential density was one of the other considerations. The existing zones for mixed use range in density between 40 units per acre and 100 units per acre. There was some concern that those allowances were too high. As we moved out into the further parts of the city, we have reduced the overall density in these kinds of zones, in the CMU and VMU zones, significantly, with a base zone, base density allowance. In each of them, the base density allowance in the CMU would be 40 units per acre, and then there are increases built in if you can do these kinds of things, if you can provide additional open space and amenities or some affordable housing or commercial space beyond what you're normally required for mixed use zones, then we can consider allowing more density residentially on the project. Village mixed use, as we said, is kind of lighter than that. The base density, in keeping with that lighter zone, is 25 units per acre with increases to 30 and 35. And those increases, are based on only two categories: open space and amenities and affordable housing. We wanted to try to encourage those options above others for those kinds of lighter duty mixed use developments in those areas of the city that were further from transportation opportunities. Additionally, too, the parking requirements in the VMU are significantly higher as well, especially for the larger bedroom counts, or for the mid-range bedroom counts, There's also an ability to reduce the commercial requirement in the VMU zone that's built in, and it's a matrix. You have to do things to reduce the commercial, and without being too basic about it, the idea is that in those further out areas of the city, the commercial is not as easy to provide in the mixed use zone at the square footages that we can provide them right around the track stations with that density, because you don't have hundreds and hundreds of units to work with, and you might or might not have as good of drive-by visibility. So in the CMU zone, there's no ability to reduce the commercial. What we calculate is what's required. And then again, they should be able to provide even more. So there's a density bonus based on providing more commercial than you're required. In the VMU, by contrast, we're allowing or proposing an allowance to remove some of that commercial requirement. We calculate the total, say it's 10,000 square feet. And if they can do certain things, if they can provide affordable housing, if they can provide additional open space amenities, or voluntarily reduce if they can provide those open spaces amenities or provide affordable housing, then we can consider reducing some of that commercial requirement accordingly. But
Jared?
it shouldn't just be done for nothing. Yeah.
Okay. Could you go over that again?
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
The basic idea. So
Yeah, I'm
we would
a little
calculate.
lost.
No, you're fine. I apologize. I know it's a whole lot of information to try to take in and understand, and it's a lot to try to cover.
And I've read it twice, so
I've read it like 20, and I'm still lost sometimes. So don't feel bad. The idea is that in the VMU, and I'm going to go back to a slide here. Centers mixed use would be, for ease of thinking about it, would be more appropriate in areas that are already identified as regional centers. So near to the track stations, perhaps, maybe just off of them, or around the Fashion Place Mall, or along the corridor of State Street, where there's a high volume of traffic and a really good established, pretty large scale commercial history. So the centers mixed use makes more sense there. And there's no opportunity in that zone to say, well, we're required to do 20,000 square feet of commercial for our mixed use project based on our project frontage. So when we require commercial in mixed use, we look at your property frontage. I'm going to go to a slide here. So we would look at, for example, this property right here and say your public street frontage, your principal street frontage, only the main streets, collectors and arterials, streets like State Street. This property frontage, we calculate that, take a percentage of it at a 40-foot depth and say you're required to produce this much commercial for your mixed-use project. Well, that's what we do with our normal mixed-use zones. In our VMU and CMU proposals, we're talking mostly about where you're taking an area that's already commercial, a project that's already commercial, a property that's been used commercially in the past, and you're adding residential to it. You're not building from the ground up because there's a new track station and you used to be nothing there. These are areas of the city that have been grocery stores, that have been big boxes, and those uses have, in some cases, declined. In some cases, they've vacated, and we want to look at redevelopment there. And to do that, we need to be able to provide some ability to mix uses. But we want to do that at appropriate scales. And that scale is inverted for the VMU, that village mixed use, and that centers mixed use. It's probably more commercial with less added residential in the CMU and a little bit different in the VMU. But we calculate that commercial requirement based on that public street frontage. So when I say reduce it, we calculate it and then say if you're in the VMU zone or you've asked for the VMU zone, we would be saying, well, you're required to do 20,000 square feet of commercial. We can look at reducing that. If you don't have the commercial viability because that environment's changed and it's going to be smaller scale, fine. We want to keep the site viable and get the commercial that we can. If it's less than that, great. However, it ought to come with some considerations. Either we're getting something for that reduction, we're getting affordable housing, or we're getting more open spaces and amenities on that project. And those two kinds of incentives provide the same kind of vibrancy or activity on the site that you would want to see. So the reduction that you would normally get from commercial that you're not going to have as much of. So we try to produce a very livable project that people spend more time in, and we get some of the reduction of traffic, some of the reduction of parking, but not nearly like we do in the heavier commercial mixed uses. Does that make a little more sense?
I'm still a little confused about the areas that
Sure.
they're allowed.
Okay. Well, you can't think of it first off as the areas that they're allowed in. I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry. They're not really the areas that they're allowed in. They are.
But you talked about commercial when I'm not sure how to express it, but you talked about commercial in this area based on this, and not so much commercial required in this area based on this.
Okay. So I think I see where I might have lost you. So in the CMU zone that we're proposing, that would probably be most appropriate along, say, for example, along State Street. We have to consider it based on its applications because it doesn't exist yet, right? So, yeah. Point at 53rd, these kind of centers.
Okay.
So now that you've mentioned those areas that you just said, can I go back over just a little? I know time we're going to have,
you're fine.
but just go back over some of the things that they would be required to do and what they would not. Similar to what when Gary came in.
Yeah.
Give us a little idea what this would do.
Okay. So for Point at 53rd, for example, okay, so we would look at their commercial and they probably have way more. I haven't calculated what they'd be required to do if they were a blank site under the proposed zone. But odds are they've got tens of thousands of square feet of commercial. They probably got way more than we would require, and they're not interested in getting rid of all of that. They want to modify some of it because they're losing tenants for boxes and not getting them back. So they're more interested in sites out on State Street that have better visibility, that are shorter trip kind of sites, shorter trip commercial, and that would interact well with some units on the site. That zone, CMU, I'm going to go to that real quick, would allow 35 units to the acre to start with as a base density, just as it is, and a certain parking requirement as well. And that base density could be increased if, for example, Point at 53rd, let's say it's them, and they want to go to 40 units to the acre, they could be considered for 40 units to the acre if they were interested in or able to add 10% of their site, 10% more than they're required for landscaping. They're already required 15%.
Yeah.
So they increase the landscaping or the amenities, or they are willing to provide affordable housing at certain rates, or if they have percentages of commercial already above what they need, or willing to provide that and keep more commercial. So if they're willing to keep more commercial, we can give them a little more density because the interaction stays appropriate, the mix on the site.
So Jared, tell us, okay, specifically then, if say that area went along with those criterias, I know you've got 40 units per acre. Tell us what that is as far as, say, apartments.
Like how many units it would be? Gary's is 10 acres roughly, so it would be somewhere just under, it's a little under 10, so it's around 400 units at 40.
Thank you.
Yep. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
And then conversely, in the village mixed use, the densities are lower, but you can increase under the proposed code based on open space and amenities, providing 2 additional outdoor amenities and 10% of the total, 10% more of the total site in landscaping. They're required 15% as well. So if they want to do that way, or they could go a kind of a simpler calculation and make sure 10% of the units they provide are affordable housing, are reserved for affordable housing at 80% of the AMI. And that number gets increased to 35 if they're willing to do even more of those 2 different things. But there's no mechanism for them to do what we just talked about in reducing that commercial requirement for the CMU. Or sorry, yeah. They have, sorry, the reverse of that. I'm just all discombobulated from all the tech stuff tonight. We have proposed that the VMU, being a lighter duty mixed use, there might be sites that are appropriate to really reduce that commercial somewhat down to 40% of what we would calculate as required. So if you were required to do 20,000 square feet, we might be able to get you down below that based on your site if you're willing to do these things and provide open space amenities or affordable housing. Does that make sense? There are two proposals tonight that allow that reduction. One of them is the village mixed use, and we'll get to the other one in just a moment. Parking, as we said, we have increased the parking requirements, generally speaking, across the board, and the VMU and CMU proposed zones are in that mix as well. We're looking at smaller minimum requirements for the CMU zone than the VMU because it's going to, generally speaking, in the areas that it's going to be appropriate, there's going to be more commercial provided, and that lets you do that shared parking, the joint use parking when hours are different and people are accommodating each other. So we can have better access to crossover parking in the CMU zone than we will get in the VMU zone. We're probably also likely further outside of the core of the city where the CMU would be more appropriate to see larger bedroom numbers as well, bedroom counts in the projects. But there's always that ability of the development itself to look at their needs and say, well, if we can't do this parking, we can always change our unit mix, our bedroom count mix, and get that parking number down. The process is still going to involve what we call master site plans in the VMU and CMU zones, as well as in several cases with the existing zones. This was to address some of the concerns we had about traffic and We had concerns about traffic and parking, and also with the public facilities, the ability of sewer and water and everyone to handle those kinds of density increases. So we worked to produce a proposal that would deal with that through the master site plan. So in a master site plan, an application for it at all has to provide a traffic impact study, an analysis of the parking, and a review of the adequate public facilities and utilities that gets performed with our Public Works Department. And we may require, as a city, public services review for police or fire, parks, school, whatever seems appropriate, depending on the application and where it is and what impacts it might have.
Why do you say may require?
That one, that's just the feeling of the group. We worked extensively with a lot of city departments to put this together, and it wasn't felt that one needed to be required as a hard requirement for the application itself. In many cases, it might be, but they didn't want to leave it as an absolute requirement.
If we wanted to, we could require it.
Easy change, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Quickly, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just kind of want to know what some of those examples would be where it would be may require. Is it depending on the size of the project, the location? What would be some of those factors?
Size would be a good consideration. I'm sorry, Melinda, what one? Yeah, size, location, and the situation at the time. We not being able to conceive of every possible kind of scenario, we wanted to leave open the possibility to say we don't generally, fire usually can handle everything that we throw at them, but we want to make sure that if we need to do a fire review, we put that up front as opposed to later on in the process. And this is front loaded because they can't make the application without these considerations. So if we look at an application at a site and we know that someone's going to make an application for master site plan, we can tell them up front, well, you're going to want to spend time doing a review with fire. We want to make sure that all of their concerns are met because in this particular case, we have these issues. We don't want to try to anticipate all of that. So, master site plan itself, so that's the application. You have to provide those things just to apply under the code. And then the components themselves of the master site plan have not changed from what we had written back in 2019. In a master site plan on larger sites and horizontal mixed-use sites, remember we've talked about before how it's not always vertical. It's not always the shops underneath and the apartments above. Sometimes it's pad sites out front. Building orientation is a bigger deal in those larger and horizontal projects. So we orient to private streets and accesses, not as much to the parking lots. We look at a central feature. We form outdoor spaces and link them with pedestrian walkways. And we look at how those pedestrian walkways also link to other sites, to future sites and other potential sites. And the reason that that's important is that the interior site needs to function like a true mixed-use site. If you don't have that requirement, then the pad sites get put out front with no connection to the interior of the site. And I had a big slide, but we talked about with the Planning Commission. I don't want to, there's not enough time and everything to do all the slides, but it's been done very poorly in lots of places. When we did the Van Winkle Crossing, I think we got this connection right. These kind of master site plan elements forced a better design that's more integrated. So we want to keep those. And we're renaming the Memorandum of Understanding that we did before to Master Site Plan Agreement. It just makes more sense. To talk really quickly about, because I know we're short on time, I want you guys to be able to ask questions as much as you want. Existing mixed-use zones that we have, the TOD on the north, Murray City Center District in the middle of town and our downtown, and then around the station, the mixed-use zone. Again, we have not proposed a lot of changes, especially in the transit-oriented development zone. It's mostly built out. There's not a lot left. It's kind of isolated from other parts of the city, but we have proposed capping the density at 100 units per acre like we've done it in the downtown zone. It currently was not. It was unlimited density. And we've limited the ground floor commercial. We've specified that it's required at a depth of 40 feet along the principal streets. Principal streets in the TOD zone are Fireclay Avenue here and Main Street. And that we've done that in the past. We just didn't clarify that. We wanted to clarify and specify it's 40 foot of depth. Murray City Center District, very much the same. The parking requirements have been increased based on those bedroom counts, just like the other zones, as opposed to just being a per unit, it was one per unit before. Residential density remains at 100 units per acre west of State Street, and we're proposing 80 units per acre east of State Street. And the ground floor commercial, again, it's 40 feet along principal streets. So we've tried to identify that it's not every street in the zone that requires that commercial property calculation. It's just the principal streets, State Street, Vine Street, 4800 South, not Commerce Drive, Box Elder, for example. And then residential density and parking, the MCCD, this is, and the TOD, these are just comparative tables. You'll see that the parking requirements are exactly the same for the TOD and the MCCD. And the density, again, is just slightly different with that 80 units per acre east of State Street. The Murray Central mixed use. So formerly the mixed use zone, that orange around the Murray Central station, we wanted to geographically and sort of verbally tie that to that station, since that's the reason we have that zone in the first place. So it's called, now we're proposing to rename it the Murray Central Mixed Use Zone. The residential parking requirements have been increased according to bedroom counts, and the density ranges from 40 units per acre to 80 units per acre based on your distance from your project to the station platform. And we're proposing measuring that from the street frontage, the public frontage of the project to the platform. So where people can actually get out and go to the platform, that's where we want to measure that distance. We are allowing or recommending that ground floor commercial requirement is only for the depth of 40 feet along principal streets. And then again, you can make reductions in the in the MCMU West District and East District based on providing more open space and amenities and providing affordable housing or reducing your density. Let me get into that just a little bit and show you what I mean. First of all, the first important part of that we talked about when we talked about the big points. There's an East District and a West District proposed. And the reason for that is, that came up a little bit with the Planning Commission, and I wanted to make it clear. This right here is the East Subdistrict, everything east of I-15. And right here in red is the West Subdistrict proposed for the mixed use zone. On this slide right here, you can see this right here is that mixed use. This is a snip from the future land use map of the general plan. In 2017, looking at it with our consultants, the staff and city and consultants decided that this area west of Commerce, actually the west side of Commerce Drive and westward, in the area that had already been zoned mixed use in 2010 or whatever it was really not as ideal for mixed uses, especially at those scales, as the east side of the tracks and the freeway. So we removed those in the general plan's future land use designations to office and professional office, and left the rest of it in mixed use zone. And that difference roughly corresponds to the West Subdistrict and the East Subdistrict. Does that make sense? Okay. So there are slight differences in the parking and differences in the residential density allowed in the West and East Subdistricts, and also in how much of the commercial you can reduce based on providing new things. In the East Subdistrict, you can only reduce down to 40%, or 60% rather, of the, I'm going to skip ahead ones. You can only reduce down to 60% of the requirement in the East Subdistrict, although there are some challenges to providing it in some of those areas. We can't put really high density housing right at the station because of environmental problems. So all of our projects are a little further out than we'd like them to be. But in the West Subdistrict, that's very far out and more akin to the VMU that we're proposing really in terms of its final outcomes. We're allowing an allowance all the way down to 30% of the required commercial. There are some really tough areas down there west of the freeway to really provide good commercial. But in reducing all that way down, there need to be serious considerations for either reducing the density that's there or adding open space and amenities or providing serious affordable housing for those projects. Again, the density and parking. Density in the West District, in the West Subdistrict, we proposed at just 40 units per acre and no increases to that. In the East Subdistrict, it's that matrix of how far you are from the track station. Less than half or more than half a mile out, 40 units per acre, just like the MCMU West. Half a mile, 50 units per acre. At quarter mile, 65. And only the highest at 80 at within an eighth of a mile of the platform from your project. That's roughly a little bit more than a city block. So,
Jared,
yeah.
How is that determined, the quarter mile, half mile? Is it as the crow flies or is it as you can walk it?
So it's just a radius. And the walking comes in this final one down here. So we would measure that first density calculation and say, well, if you're within a quarter mile, let's say, you're within a quarter mile, so you're allowed 65 units per acre. However, if you're a weird property whose back is turned to the station platform, that station platform might only be a half a mile or a quarter mile from your public frontage, like we measure. Mm-hmm. But anywhere where you cannot measure a walking distance that's at least less than half a mile, 40 units per acre is what's appropriate. So It drops if you can't measure a walking distance. So rather than go, your walking distance is X, you get this density. We said your radius is X, you get this density. If you can't show a half a mile walking distance, that's people's tolerance for walking well. 40 units to the acre is still twice what we allow for most high density apartment projects. So it's not nothing. And we felt like that was appropriate for that zone if you can't walk to it in less than half a mile.
Okay, good.
We did the reduction of commercial. Wow, I made it all the way through. So, and then we can talk about your questions. The Planning Commission, as I mentioned, when I was waiting for slides to come up and I was fumbling through what was in my head, the Planning Commission did vote 5-0 last week on July 15th to forward a recommendation of approval to you. We had a good discussion. They made a couple of very minor changes that I believe I had sent to you. They were very small, different changes. So you're not really considering anything terribly different tonight than what they considered. Do you have any questions for us at this point?
Yes, questions.
Can you talk a little bit about the changes that the Planning Commission asked for?
Sure. One of them was to flatly remove drive-throughs from the TOD zone. We have an allowance for drive-throughs and consideration of drive-throughs in all of these zones, and they're pedestrian-oriented zones, and the Planning Commission at sometimes has expressed some concerns with drive-throughs there. In looking at drive-throughs, and especially after the pandemic, there's a lot of interest, especially in the further out mixed-use zones, to have drive-throughs on some of those pad restaurants. And they don't have to negate the good things that are happening with a mixed-use zone, but they have to be done properly. We had a slide that we talked about with the Planning Commission where this drive-through was reversed. So the drive-through ran between the apartments that are right next to it and the restaurant. So to get to the restaurant, you got to cross the drive-through. That's just bad design. It's not impossible to do drive-through. It's just not as easy. The TOD is mostly built out. We have a couple of sites left to go. They're probably not going to be pad sites and horizontal developments. So we felt like it was a good conciliation to give and remove the drive-throughs. That's one. One of the other changes was to add the same kind of building considerations that are in the other mixed-use zones to the VMU and CMU zones. So in your mixed-use zone and your MCCD zone, there's language for under building requirements that talks about no more than 30 feet of a blank wall without some sort of architectural feature, clear glass on the main floor, et cetera. These are all good considerations we probably should have had in there already. And we definitely promote them with mixed use, but it's nice to have them just as requirements. So we added that language to both the VMU and CMU zones. Outside storage, thank you. I was going to forget. I knew there was one I was searching for. We don't allow outdoor storage in mixed-use zones, in our existing mixed-use zones. Outdoor storage of materials, not allowance. And we translated that to the two new proposed zones as well. I made that language clear. And there was, no, we didn't actually wind up striking any other uses from the use list. There was one that we were concerned about, but it turned out to be already okay. So those are the changes.
Okay. Yes, Kat?
Are drive-throughs different than curbside services? Like I don't drive through at Zupa's, but I do park and not go in.
That's a great question. And we actually have curbside management as a plan. You have to, and I didn't want to put everything in the slides would have taken 3 days.
Absolutely.
Curbside management is in all of the zones, in the existing ones now and in the two new proposed zones. You have to provide with your application, whether it's for design review only or whether it's for a master site plan, a plan for your curbside management.
But they're not the same.
They're not the same,
Okay.
no. We would look at curbside pickup as a curbside management issue. So they might provide it somewhere on site, but they have the same considerations for deliveries and pickups and all of that.
Okay. Totally different question.
Sure.
Looking at the buffering, it has the height cannot exceed 2 stories or 35 feet in height. Is there a reason 2 stories and not just a height restriction? Why do we care how many stories are in it?
Well, that's a good question. I probably don't care as much as for the stories as the height. Although with the 2-story units, the message is clearer perhaps, and you don't wind up with the second story. You don't have room on the second story to provide the stairs to the rooftop gardens, and part of it's tied up with the buffering with rooftop gardens, et cetera. So it made more sense to us in the buffer requirement to say 2 stories typically wind up looking more residential, more traditionally residential as opposed to more urban. So just that.
With that for stories, does that include a basement or I'm thinking
You wouldn't count the basement as a story. So you could have a basement if Trey will allow you, depending on the water
Trey
tables
lets
that we're
me.
in, you might get a basement. There's a lot of places in Murray where you can't have a basement. So I'm just saying. But
I'm just thinking specifically like the Hunter Woods apartments. Those are 3 stories, but the first one you go down to, but it's not fully underground. Like I'm just kind of wondering that nitpicky,
that half basement
what that looks like.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider that a story. I would consider I think in terms of the ground level story as the ground level, that would be my first story.
So you would not consider that even if it was halfway up?
Halfway, I'd consider that a basement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just as long as the height It's
As long as and that's I guess why the reason for all the
meets the height
considerations.
requirement.
And the third story issue to me is really just that you wind up with that more traditional looking unit with with only 2 stories allowed. With a third story and 35 feet of height, you're either a really low pitch or you're no pitch, you're rooftop stuff. And I'd rather that they be more
So it's
traditional.
design sort
It's
of.
to kind of force a design.
Okay. It's an inclination towards a design without a design.
Exactly, without a restriction.
Okay. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
I had we received an email with a concern about commercial use not being specifically defined and a request for educational services to be included there.
Right.
Is there a reason they wouldn't be, or would they be allowed? What is?
Yeah. So let me respond to that by giving you my land use background opinion on that. There are commercial uses, and commercial in this broad category would include whatever industrial uses are allowed as well. And there are residential uses, and there are public and quasi-public uses. And schools and private schools and education facilities are public and quasi-public uses. They are not commercial. So they might add to the neighborhood character, et cetera, but they're not, for purposes of considering mixed use and the parking requirements and the density allowances, et cetera, they are not commercial uses in my mind. They're
Even private ones?
Quasi-public, even private schools.
All right. Where do preschools fall in there? Are those
That's a good
private?
question. Daycare is different than schools. So I would consider preschools and daycares differently. Daycare is commercial activity
Thank you.
and a really good addition to a mixed use project as well, or any neighborhood.
Childcare.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
So yeah, there's a distinction there. It's subtle, but there's a distinction.
Okay.
Anything else? Or so many things that we can't quite.
Yeah, I have
I know
many.
it's a lot. I'm sorry about that.
Rosalba, did you have a question? Okay. All right. I have a couple of concerns, and one is the parking, and I've expressed this before. We're Murray, and we still like our cars.
Sure.
And often the developments that we're going to get, if they are apartments, they're going to be very expensive. And what's going to end up happening is there will probably be more than one family living there, or one person can't afford it, so they have a roommate, and they both have their cars. And that really concerns me, and I think that can be an issue. And so in the MCCD, I would, rather than 1.05, I'd rather have 1.5. I think that's
For
on
are
the
you talking about
residential parking.
for the 2-bedroom, for the 2-bedroom or the 1-bedroom ones?
1 bedroom. For the 2-bedroom, rather than 1.5, I'd rather have 2.
I see.
And then also for the MCMU East, I'd rather have, rather than 1.25, I'd rather have 1.5. I think that's more reasonable and then 2 for the 2-bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your response?
Well, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Doug.
I just want you to know what the mayor, negotiated the parking ratios to that you're seeing right now. So that was also one of the big concerns that the mayor had, and we know that there was not agreement even amongst staff as to what the parking ratios needed to be. And Public Work, for example, was requesting higher ratios. Planning was requesting lower ratios. We did a lot of research on existing density apartment type developments in Murray City. And so we studied what the parking ratios were, what is working, what is not working. We also talked to outside consultants, had them do some studies on not only what is out there in surrounding areas of Salt Lake County and what they think parking ratios work. They also used what is called a ULI, Urban Land Institute, parking ratio study, and we had a lot of discussion about that. And so I'm not saying that you can't increase the parking ratios. What I'm trying to say is this has been a very controversial, and people have so many different opinions about what parking is. I know that you also have an email from one of the property owners that wants to decrease the parking ratios because they can show through their experience that they have projects out there over, I think it was 15,000 units out there that that they can show that what is being proposed in this ordinance is too high of parking ratios. And of course, if you overpark a project, it becomes too expensive for a developer to even do the project. So I just want you to understand that we didn't take this lightly and that we tried to negotiate what we felt was a reasonable parking ratio based upon all these different opinions out there. The ratios are much higher than what we have had in the past in Murray. So please know that was a topic that took a lot of study by staff. And because there are so many different opinions, the mayor had to get everybody to come together at the table. Everybody had to give up something, but this was the consensus as to what the best parking ratio should be. So with that, I'll let Jared then answer, because Jared was also had a different opinion than even others did.
Doug, let me address Doug real quick. Doug, on Public Works, what was their reasoning for wanting higher parking?
Well,
More, excuse me.
so the ratio that is in here right now they are comfortable with, but when we originally started the project, the parking ratios were lower as originally proposed by Community and Economic Development. And they felt like, based on past experience in Murray City, that if we stayed with those lower parking ratios, we would have problems with parking and that we'd have spillover out onto the street. So Public Works wanted to see higher ratios than what Community and Economic Development did. And that resulted in this outside study to find out really what is a reasonable parking ratio that everybody could agree on. And that's the number now that's in there. And Public Works, Community and Economic Development are in agreement that this is a compromised good parking ratio that's going to work. You're still going to have different opinions. You're going to have, like I say, developers that want less, and you may feel like you want more, and ultimately that'll be your decision.
Yeah, it's still, I don't know if they realize that, it's going to cost $1,500 a month for a one bedroom, or, $2,000. I mean, it just is so expensive.
I think one of the reasons that we came to a compromise, we're able to still work in the same building and everything at this point. I think, I haven't seen Trey for a couple of days, but I think we're okay. Is that the important thing here? It is the number, but the other important thing to focus on here is the way that the numbers go up. When you really see the impact, according to that ULI range and what they call the mode shift modifiers and things like that, the study that we had done, where you really see the increase is at 2 bedrooms and up. And right here on this chart, 2.5 parking spaces per unit, basically when it's 3 bedrooms and up, that is what we require for multifamily that doesn't have a commercial component, that doesn't get any benefits from shared parking or anything like that. That's basically saying at 3 bedrooms, I don't care if you're next to the track station, you're probably going to have a couple of cars and you're going to have the same kind of impact that a normal apartment does. And that's
right.
hard compromise.
And I think that's,
as a planner, that's a hard compromise for me, but I believe that it's probably the case. The studies are bearing that out for us. And that at 2 bedrooms, you're going to have some impact. But don't forget that when you're looking at that 1.5 number here, this is in an environment where you're going to have shared parking capabilities with those 2 bedrooms. And that 1 bedroom unit, you're going to have shared parking from that commercial, because this is our TOD and MCCD. And the MCMU East, let me get to the parking, the MCMU East and West, 1 space for the studios, 1.25 space for a studio there, 1.5 for the 1 bedroom, and going up to 2.15 for the 2 bedroom units. That's recognizing that it's really not going to benefit as much from that shared parking from the commercial, that joint use, that unbundled parking. You're not going to see those benefits as much the further out you go. You're going to see them a little more in the east side, but still less than we had anticipated in the past. 1.25 for a 1 bedroom, 1.5 for the 2 bedroom, and again, 2.5. This is exactly the same as that It's even a little higher on the one bedroom ones, recognizing that it's not going to have as much commercial as those other two zones. So it really has to do with how much commercial you might get on the projects. And when you get to this, I'll get to go back to go to them, but talking about the CMU and VMU parking, same kind of thing. 1.15 for a studio unit in the CMU zone, 1.5 for the one bedroom. You're going to have lots of commercial and joint shared stuff. But again, we just have concerns about that parking, so we've raised it. And then 2.5 when you're at 3 bedrooms plus, no effect, same thing here. But it's actually even just a little higher in the VMU zone.
And I understand it's more expensive for the developers to do that. I know parking spaces are very expensive.
Sure.
I get that.
Now, Jared, so how much is this, what have we gone up on parking compared to what it was in the other?
Almost impossible to say how much we're up
Okay.
because we've totally changed the way that we do it.
But it looks like it's, from what I've read, I can't give a percentage either, but it looks like it's quite a bit.
It's at least 20% or so, maybe more. Yeah, it might be. And I have to run that. Sure. Depending on it'll depend on the projects. If a project comes in at all 3 bedroom units and up, and I don't think you'll see that, but that would be an increase of more than 50%. That would be more than 100% increase. Well, it'll be 150% increase in the downtown zone, for example. But I don't think that's likely, but that's what it would be. So it's kind of a range, and you can't really say. I wish I could.
Right. And if you don't have enough parking, it causes so many problems and requires, so much from the city.
Well, and that's one of the reasons.
It still concerns me.
I understand the concern. I really do. I just, at a certain point, I think we have to rely and believe that the parking analyses that are being done are going to be valid. And they're all coming back with less parking than we would normally require for residential. Slightly less anyway, as long as the bedroom counts are lower, if there's commercial to rely on for that unbundled parking for the shared. So that's what we're proposing, but again, it's your decisions.
Right. I still have problems with that.
Is
there anything else I can talk about?
Yeah. So one of my biggest concerns in this is we've had since February, I guess we met with you in June. But before that, we didn't meet with you until March. And in that time and duration for me, I didn't see any of this. There was no updates. There was just kind of the stagnant of we're working on it. Come June, 29th, 26th we met?
I think it was the 29th.
Here's all the information. We'll follow up with the slides that we have from the meeting. And we got them and we got a big packet. I'm just kind of going through the process because it seems so fast. And there's still a lot that I have a lot of questions. I think between us all, we kind of all have the same questions. And I'm not saying that what we don't have is it's good. Mm-hmm. It's great. But I think there still needs to be a lot of consideration on our part. And that goes into the next question. And I think this question is for GL. Legally, how is the council obligated if the memorandum, per se, whatever we're calling it now, and we don't like something within the project, what are the legal ramifications on that to us as a council?
You'll have, if you look at the ordinances, you'll have standards that will be followed that have to be included in that agreement. I wouldn't expect it to be a knockdown, drag out negotiation. I think it's going to be pretty clear what's going to be required that they have to come forward with to show us. We have been through this process once before, similar to this, and I don't recall any real disagreements on what was in the agreement.
If I could also add, the moratorium, as previously mentioned, expires on August 2nd. Now, if the council doesn't take any action, if you want more time to study it, you can do that, recognizing though that the moratorium will go away on August 2nd, and any developer out there who wants to submit a proposal to the city for development can do so under the old, or I shouldn't say old, under the existing ordinances, right? Now, the question I think that we have asked ourselves is, what's the likelihood of something like that happening? Well, I don't think we really know, but I do know that there's one developer in particular that is very anxious to submit as soon as possible. And so the risk that is out there is that if there is no action taken by August 2nd and a developer submits, then they are not going to be subject to all these issues that we're talking about right now. Now, we had originally planned to have you adopt this on August 3rd, one day after the moratorium, recognizing that that's risk, but not very much risk. And I think the council wanted to have it moved up to today. So from our perspective, from the administration's perspective, if you want to wait until August 3rd before you take any final action on this to either study it more or ask questions or get more input, for whatever reason, we are comfortable with the August 3rd date and having you take action then. We're probably not real comfortable with you waiting much longer than August 3rd. And then as a follow-up to that, I recognize there are still a lot of things that need to be discussed. I mean, I know that there are issues about affordable housing that maybe you're not comfortable with, or maybe there's issues about open space that you're not comfortable with yet and that you still have questions. I think that we still have the ability to work through some of these issues even after when you adopt it. But I would hate to see us wait too long to work through some of those issues. So I would just recommend, I know the mayor would recommend that you at least take action on or before August the 3rd. And then if we have to fine tune some of these other issues, we can do that afterward.
Now, that was a question I was going to ask you about. Oh, sorry, Dan, you were going to say something? No. About fine tuning, that we had mentioned that before. That's not a problem then.
It's not a problem recognizing that once it's adopted, whoever applies, they'll get the, you might not get, depends on who applies and how fast they apply after the August 3rd. But yeah, there's no problem to fine tune some of these issues later. I mean, that's typically what we do with ordinances anyway. Okay. The biggest issues are in the ordinance, we think anyway.
Right.
And the biggest concerns dealing with parking, with density limits, with height restrictions. I mean, originally that was kind of what drove the moratorium and where we're going to allow certain types of developments. Those are the big issues are addressed in this. Some of the smaller ones might not be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you've done a good job with that. GL, I'm wondering if there's some way, if we wait until the 3rd, that we could make sure someone doesn't just come in on the 2nd.
No, the statute is pretty clear. It's 180 days, which is up on the 2nd. And so
okay,
the 3rd
so there's nothing.
There is no other way, no.
We could call a special session.
You could call a meeting between now and August 2nd if you wanted to, yeah. You could do that.
Okay, I think I might be more comfortable with that. What does the council think about that?
There's a couple of things, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I agree with Diane. I don't know what the balance back to parking. I don't know what the balance is for parking. I don't know what is acceptable and what isn't. I know in the back of my mind, these studies are being done on, in my opinion, all underparked developments, because you can't go by a large apartment building without seeing cars on the street. So I don't know where that balance hits. I do know that a couple of years ago we fought and we went from 1 to 1.15, and it was like the Alamo. And we've gone up quite a ways from there, but I think if there's anything we can do, because in a studio or a 1-bedroom, you're going to have at least 2 people, husband, wife, whatever, and then they move up to, from there you have roommates. So
yeah,
I think
it's the way of the world now.
Yeah, it is. I think parking needs to be looked at. I think it would be a mistake to not act on this tonight, because we can fine tune it as we go forward. But if we don't act tonight, like they said, on the day it expires, there's probably developers that are waiting. that like the old, and they could submit their plans. I don't know how big a risk that is, but I think it's definitely a risk.
Can I say something?
Right. We could delay until next week if you wanted to continue this, or we can.
I think having the opportunity of passing this would be great and then fine tuning it later. I just don't know if I have the confidence to say those fine tunings are going to come in a timely manner for us to feel comfortable. I think I'd rather feel comfortable with the time, a little bit of more time next week to really look at some of that and fine tune and bring all those, because I don't think we've even, and I apologize because I have been out with surgery, but the conversation hasn't been there. And I don't feel, and even the email that I sent, I never got a response. So I don't feel like there's been conversation with staff and myself to say, yes, I feel greatly confident in saying, let's go ahead and move forward on this. I think that fine tuning needs to be worked out. And maybe we just have to say, let's work it out and put our energy into this in the next week. But I don't have the confidence to say, yes, I trust in you guys to fine tune it after the fact.
Councilman Dominguez, could you clarify, are you concerned that you may not understand or have had the time to digest all that's in there, or do you have fine-tuning points that you want to address?
I don't feel like I fully understand. And with that being said, or feel like there's been communication with staff to really be able to better understand it. And with my concerns that I've had, those are just two concerns, but I don't feel that I'm there yet. And like I said, I apologize, but even being out in surgery, there was nothing happening even before then. So that's where I'm at. I can't speak for the rest of the council, but.
Okay, great. And I have some fine-tune issues that I also have concern about. But so, what do you think?
I guess we'll make that decision in our next meeting.
Okay. Do you want me to go through the presentation again in the next meeting? I'm just asking because I have 10 minutes for clarification. I go through it again, and we can ask more questions and see if we get more clarification, or if you're more comfortable with things. But if not, I can start, and we can do whatever you want. So.
And we can have as long of a discussion as you want to have.
Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, great.
I don't know what you guys think, but
Yeah, we can then. Kat, are you okay with that?
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Jared, we better continue on. We
Okay.
have one more item. And that is discussion on water protection ordinance amendment, Danny Astle and Corey Wells.
See if I got my mouth hold right. So, okay, we'll try to make this very quick. The ordinance change that we're asking coming forth tonight or this evening, just to share and let you ask any questions on it. But our water system is made up of 20 different wells and 8 different springs, and so we have a big job to try to maintain and make sure that we're protecting our assets for the future. And there's always some new threat that comes up. We had this ordinance done quite a few years ago, and we've made a couple of changes to it already. Oh my goodness! And so I just wanted to. We're asking to make another minor change to this ordinance. This ordinance right now. If you look up at this at the screen, we probably help understand maybe what a protection zone is. What we have up here on the screen, there's 4 different protection zones. So there's 4 different wells in that picture, and one is on Vine Street. The one's off about 5750 South above 9th East. That's our Howe well. One is at the reservoir well at the cemetery, and the other one's down on 5th East, just off of 53rd South. So there's four different wells right there in that one area, and you can see the blue right around. There's a light color right around the well. Then there's a darker blue, and then there's a really light lavender color or blue beyond that. And those are the protection zones. And the zones that our hydrologist has done and followed the groundwater patterns. And so these zones are the zones that we already have in our ordinance. But
Danny?
we need to,
Danny, show us that screen. It's so hard to see where
Yeah,
9th
can you
East
zoom
is.
it in?
let's see if I can do that.
I think that's 9th East I'm looking at, but
Yeah.
it's so small I can't see that right there.
That help?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Well, I'm trying to hold this at the same time and talk, and I need another 2 hands. So I've got Corey Wells with me here, our water superintendent. He's worked with the attorney's office to get all this drafted and taken care of. But one of the reasons that we're here this evening is we're running into these groundwater or ground source heat pumps, and they're expensive to put in, but people are looking at putting them in. And what they do is they run these lines down into the groundwater, and they circulate it through, and they're supposed to be closed loop, but which is fine, but they don't know because there's no testing requirement from the state. There's nothing that tells them that they have to do any work to make sure that it's not contaminating anything. And they don't just use water. They use a chemical in their system. And so we're adding this to our groundwater protection zone ordinance so that when these requests come in, we can continue to protect our assets. And so that's what this is all about. And I'd love to answer any questions.
Danny, could I add
If I can
something?
keep this up.
Could I add something real quick?
Yeah.
So the state legislature enacted a law several years ago allowing us to protect our wells. It's kind of a land use type thing. And what it says is in these zones, these colored zones, you cannot have a use that has certain contaminants. And so we already have and we had to list all those that we wouldn't allow in those protection zones. So this is adding an additional something that you can't use in that zone in hopes of protecting our water.
And there's different methods of drilling too. And so the state doesn't regulate that. And so it's up to the water providers to protect our
I
own.
was just going to say, and that'll protect us.
Yes.
That's easy.
And this will protect us.
Okay.
So anyway, so in a couple of weeks, we'll be back and ask you to approve this change in the ordinance. So if you have any questions, I'd love to answer more or give you more information.
I learned about this heat source when I was watching This Old House a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it's really cool.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. it's
Well,
really
and in fact,
interesting.
our high school has a groundwater
Yeah, that's right.
system, but they're not within our zones. And so there's just, some can and some can't, but we're actually getting a lot of demand for this in many of our areas that are close to our wells. And unfortunately, we have some really good wells that are in really nice neighborhoods. So anyway, thank you.
We know those neighborhoods.
Yeah. Well, you got a nice neighborhood, so. All right.
All right. If there are no other questions, thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. All right. We have about 4 minutes till our next meeting. I'm wondering, GL, is it a problem if we delay, if we allow ourselves 15 minutes? Are you aware of any issues?
If you just want to announce it on the record that that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Council, are you okay?
I am.
Yes, I agree.
I think we need a break. So we will reconvene at 6:45.